Biggest one we focus on now is consumer packaged goods companies, ones that are in the 5+ million a year range and are trying to blast off and become these massive household names and try to get acquired by something like a private equity brand or a private equity firm or a larger brand. And so in going deep on that, we've also gone deep on the influencer part of the equation too. So working with a lot of health and fitness, alternative health and wellness influencers to help promote those companies. And now we're sitting in this interesting spot where we're working with both the influencers, the consumer packaged goods brands, and doing everything on the back end. So figuring out all the logistics of getting them to work together, all the tracking, all the analytics, all the advertising. As I mentioned before the call, working on a lot of the conversion rate optimization and page development for their stores because there's a lot of custom work there. And then now we have a lot of good buddies in the space for anything else we need, but putting all those pieces together for these companies to help them really take off when they're ready to scale growth.
Welcome to another episode of the Elevate podcast. I'm your host, Delaney McGuire, and here on the show, we talk about brands, products, and people who are making an impact. We talk to technologists, entrepreneurs, product managers, anyone who is using their personal energy to better the world, make an impact, and make some money along the way. Today on the show, we have Lenny. Ian is one of my good friends. He is the co-founder of ATTNlabs and has done over $100 million in revenue in the last 4 years as a marketer for consumer product companies. He crushes it in his business. He's known in Austin as one of the best marketing agencies. So without further ado, let's jump in with Lenny. All right, Ian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Of course. So I just introduced you to our audience. You're here in Austin. We're good buddies. You are absolutely crushing it in the marketing space. Tell us a little bit about what you do and some of the impact you've had over the last several years.
Yeah, I'll keep it focused to the last several years. Yeah, my buddy Austin, who you know, and I started a marketing agency way back now. God, it was like 2018, 2019. And we did what a lot of people do in the growth and marketing space, which is just try to get anyone to work with us, any clients. And so in the start, that with all types of business models and all types of services. At one point, I think we were like doing like page development for some clients, running ads, doing emails. Like we literally were doing everything. And we really only had a core competency in paid acquisition because my co-founder Austin was really an expert in that. And we'd both done a lot of other things in marketing, but he was really an expert in that. So we just decided, you know what, it's easy to sell this service. Let's go deep on the paid advertising. And essentially for the first couple of years, that's all we did. We studied everything and just got as good as we could at that and literally just offered paid advertising. And we got into some of the tracking analytics for clients. And we're still working with a ton of different business models. So fast forward to the last few years, which is an important part of your question, we really started diving super deep into growth for a couple different specific types of business models. The biggest one we focus on now is consumer packaged goods companies, ones that are in the 5+ million a year range and are trying to blast off and become these massive household names and try to get acquired by something like a private equity brand or a private equity firm or a larger brand. And so in going deep on that, we've also gone deep on the influencer part of the equation too. So working with a lot of health and fitness, alternative health and wellness influencers to help promote those companies. And now we're sitting in this interesting spot where we're working with both the influencers, the consumer packaged goods brands, and doing everything on the back end. So figuring out all the logistics of getting them to work together, all the tracking, all the analytics, all the advertising. As I mentioned before the call, working on a lot of the conversion rate optimization and page development for their stores because there's a lot of custom work there. And then now we have a lot of good buddies in the space for anything else we need, but putting all those pieces together for these companies to help them really take off when they're ready to scale growth. And so that's what we do now in a nutshell. I know that's a lot. So if you want to get into any of that or any part of how we got there in more depth, happy to do that as well.
Yeah, perfect. What I heard in that is you guys found some success and you're really trying to be everything for all your clients. And through focusing on what your natural skill sets, what you felt like you could add unique value, you niche down to specifically health and wellness companies, specifically consumer packaged goods. And it really interestingly, even their size. So 5 million. Could you speak to why you guys chose that size company?
Yeah.
In general.
No, absolutely. And we do caveat work with consumer tech companies as well. Most of those have come through referrals. So we don't go out to market and find those clients. The ones that we've had, those have all been referrals just because you guys crush it. how those start, and I can get into that later. But
Sure.
for the ones that we go out to market and advertise ourselves as experts for, which are consumer packaged goods companies, the reason we focus on ones at that level, and 5 million a year is just like an arbitrary number I throw out to give people a way to differentiate size of companies. It could be 3 million, could be 10, just depends on what their next stage of growth is. And we're looking for companies that are trying to sell sometime in the near future. Just because of the rate of growth, they're usually the companies that are willing to invest the most in service providers who are helping with growth, who have experience to just know what to do and allow them to skip some of the time they would spend learning. So for companies that are trying to sell, that's really important to them, because if they feel like they have this, as people say, product market fit for their product or the right positioning right now, they want to capitalize on that before someone else comes to the marketplace or people are no longer interested in that specific product that's working for them. A lot of these companies have one of their many physical products that's like a hero product and is working really well. So when they want to capitalize on that and grow quickly, that's when people are usually willing to spend on a higher price service like what we offer, where we're doing everything and we've had the reps with similar business models and categories of products, and we just know what to do. So that's why we focus on those types of businesses.
Got it. And it's also really thinking from a frame of who's going to pay for it. So if
Yeah.
you have an awesome service, that's awesome, but also making sure you're aligning to a consumer or a company that is ready and willing to actually invest that. So there's less friction when it comes to bringing on new clients.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think about this a lot because I love all parts of developing a service business. But one of the big things is like who you're marketing it for, because of the nature of what you have to build into that service, right? So like when me and Austin were starting, we could do anything because we could work really for a really low price. So if someone was going to pay us $3,000 a month, like that's great. We could do that. And it was just our time labor and we were new and learning. So it's fine. Now if we take on an account, we might have 7 people, especially initially, working on it to get everything set up, to get page tests going, to get the ads going, to get creative going. Like there's a ton of people working on it, not to mention the services and SaaS in the background. So in order to facilitate that type of service, yeah, we have to have someone who's not even going to bat an eye at that. They're going to be like, great, that's going to replace 5 people I was going to have to hire in-house. Like, perfect, that's cheap. Whereas if we take it to a small business owner who's just like trying to create a lifestyle business, they're going to be like, that's not going to work for me, like that pricing. So that's the difference.
I love that. So when you're talking about paid growth, what are the main channels that you guys focus on if you're working with a new company? Yeah. Would you just break that down for us? And really why I asked a lot of the questions I'm going to ask, what I'm really trying to do is extrapolate any strategies, frameworks, mindsets that you're taking in this business that you found to be really successful, specifically in consumer packaged goods, and see how can we broaden that for really anyone working on a product or a company that might have a consumer facing side to their business. How can they think about some of these things and maybe find their own success?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think whether it's consumer or B2B, it's important just to look at people with similar categories of products or services and what channels are working for them. Because a lot of times you're in product management, so you're familiar with like product market fit, but what people think less about is like channel, like where are you going to find your audience, like channel messaging, and then like channel audience match, right? So like what messages are working on what channels, and does that channel contain your audience at the correct volume and price per user acquired or customer acquired for your product that's going to make sense. So like you really have to drill down if you're going to start spending on paid acquisition for both of those things. And for consumer packaged goods companies right now, the biggest ones for demand generation, so for pushing a product out to market that people haven't seen, are going to be Meta. Most people from there, Facebook Meta ads, are going to go to TikTok. And then from there, a lot of people, if they're really pumping like cold traffic acquisition, they may start putting out messages on YouTube. They're really going to spend a lot. But for most companies, it starts at Meta. And the reason for that, and the reason we'd still recommend that right now, even despite some of the bad press Meta has had in the paid acquisition world, is because for consumer packaged goods, most consumer companies, it's still a great way to generate demand, to just get the message out to people and to get some initial sales. And the biggest thing for anyone in our space, consumer packaged goods, or even a lot of different types of consumer products, is there's this huge ecosystem of influencers on Instagram that you can tap into to help promote products in a ton of different ways. And the different ways to do that, the different ways to negotiate those contracts can definitely get in depth. And that's a lot of what I talk about on the little bit of content you've probably seen on my LinkedIn. But for that reason, it's the number one place to start right now for those brands. So usually it'll be some combination that we're running of Meta, TikTok, and any of the main Google channels now, so with Performance Max, which is a little bit more automated, but those are the main ones we start with.
I love that. So, and even when you say Meta, it's not even just traditional advertising. It's also leveraging, maybe a bit more gritty, but getting in there and building influencer relations and doing some of that influencer marketing as well.
Yeah, I like that you said gritty because that's a great way to put it. Because right now there's no simple systems to do this because essentially the process of onboarding influencers looks like running a sales campaign. And in order to do it at scale, you essentially need a sales team because you're doing like sales development work, right? This is just like what an SDR would do at a company, going out and prospecting for people you can work with and then trying to contact them or the people who manage their accounts or their business. Like influencers, a lot of them essentially have handlers. And you're
Yeah.
going to need to be connecting with those people and building relationships with them to get them on board with what you're doing or see if there's a fit for what you're trying to promote. So that's a sales effort. And a lot of companies, definitely ones have gone heavy on consumer marketing, which is all about digital marketing, don't have a lot of reps at that. So that's the
Yeah.
whole new skill for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely something I even as of the last few days with No Talks, the app that I'm launching, I'm trying to get a pulse on how to go about that for myself. And I'm doing this like very manual outreach and connection with brands. I'm curious, maybe this is a bit of a selfish question, but for myself or anyone else who's newer into that game, outside of maybe it's in conjunction with working with a company like yours, or if they're doing it themselves, are there any systems or processes, honestly, more so systems that work really well for doing that efficiently? Or is it really just like manually get out there, get after it, track it in an Excel spreadsheet, follow up? Have you found it?
I would say anything that you're used to using as a CRM, you're going to want to use all the same best practices. So it's all about timing and follow up. But the one hack would be, like I mentioned, with some of them having handlers. There's also a lot of people that have their partnership or affiliate managers who are managing, like A, could be managing a lot of different influencers, or B, could be literally the gatekeeper for A, influencers you're trying to get to's entire Rolodex of companies they're working with and the person that vets it. So you really want to be cognizant about finding that person if you have a feeling that they're part of that communication process.
Yep.
And building the relationship with them. Because usually, especially at a higher level, influencers don't have the communication bandwidth to be dealing with anyone that's doing partnership outreach. They have someone who's handling that. So if you can build a relationship with that person, you're probably going to be basically on their short list of people to work with. And it's just going to be super profitable in the long term. So I do that. And again, the bonus is when you find one of these people who's managing multiple influencers.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Yeah.
Totally. That's really smart.
Yeah, there's this whole ecosystem developing for managing talent, just like you used to have. And like, we always compare it to like in Hollywood with agents, you know?
Yeah.
So you need to go out and find those agents because they're out there.
Yep. Love that. So for brands that are out there and they're maybe gaining a bit of traction, whether it's users on a platform or they're starting to sell product, how should a founder or someone who runs a marketing segment of a company think about when is it time to start spending on growth?
Yeah. So I would say as soon as you have a product you think is ready for market. So it's always as soon as you want to make sales, you need to spend on growth. But it depends like what channel you're starting with, like who your audience is, what kind of product it is. So maybe what would be helpful is if you think there's a business model that would be useful for your audience, we could talk about that. Would probably direct that.
Yeah,
growth
fair
is
enough.
such an all-encompassing sort of word.
Fair enough. You can't just make it extremely broad and try to get some tactical feedback there. So that's valid. Yeah. So let's see here. If we're standard audience, why don't we just take a CPG company launching a cool product if that's your space, and really assuming that not everyone has an insane amount of capital. So I've put the grit hat on. I've built my Shopify store. I have my first shipment of products. I'm ready to start growing. Maybe how would you encourage, if you were consulting someone who just started a business, who's being mindful of their spend, how should they think about that? And how would you allocate your first bit of marketing spend to validate and find that market fit without just throwing 10 grand at Facebook ads before it's proven out and then you just waste it all because it wasn't done efficiently?
Yeah. So tactically, there's a million ways to do this, right? There's lots of ways to skin a cat. So instead of that, because anyone can read documentation on how to set up a specific piece of software, I'm going to give you like two sort of mindsets.
Cool.
So the first one is prospecting versus mining. So when we think of growth, a lot of times we're thinking about optimizing systems to scale something that's working or that we feel we have traction on, right? Like you find product market fit and then you scale it. A lot of times that's where we think of growth and what's associated with that word, which is mining the data internally at your company for what's working, and then using that to optimize your spend on whatever channel that is, whether it's blog posts of a certain type with a certain mix of keywords that are working, content, video content that's working, ads that are working. You look at everything. What are we getting the most consistent traction on that looks like it scales as we double down on that? And can we continue that? How far? And how can we like project that with modeling? That's what people think of when they think of growth. And that's what I would think of in marketing as mining. You're mining the data, right? But when we're starting, we're not in the mining phase. We're in the prospecting phase. So in the prospecting phase, we don't have that company internal data, which we're going to be able to capitalize on to know where to allocate our resources. The big question is like, what do we do without that data? And the answer is we have to source it from the very limited audience that is receptive to what we have to offer. So what you want to do is you want to think about two things when you're prospecting. Where can I get the highest volume of testing for the lowest price? Which for consumer packaged goods, as I mentioned, oftentimes is Meta or Instagram ads, where you can run an ad and immediately get some feedback in terms of, at a minimum, is Facebook even showing this to people? Are my ads even good enough to get out there? Yep. Then from there, maybe you're looking at, okay, are people clicking through on it? And what are they doing, right? Is it relevant? Are they sticking on my page? So you're getting some good feedback there, like immediately. Are people clicking? And then how long are they staying on the page? Do they care about what's on the page? From there, you can look at follow-on events on the site. And then eventually things like filling out an email address, if it's a trial for an app like No Talks, you mentioned you're building, or if it's for a product that's not yet released, or if you do have a product and you're getting purchases, are you ever getting them that far? So that's cool. And that's some sort of quantitative data. But what we really want when we're prospecting and trying to get initial traction is qualitative data. So what you want to think about is almost even more than selling the product initially. That is the best feedback. People are willing to buy it. But the problem with that is you don't know why they're buying it. So almost in parallel to trying to get people to buy the product as your highest sort of goal, your key performance indicator, can I sell this product? You want to see if you can talk to those people who are doing that as almost as important a goal, if not more important, because that's going to lead to more important data for follow-on sales potentially than even the people buying. Because again, with quantitative data in terms of what they're doing, what demographic this person falls in, it's really going to give you a limited ability to dig into the reasons someone made all those decisions. And the only way to do that is to talk to them, do something like a video survey, something like a video surveying tool like Video Ask, doing something like a type form. And like the easiest way we do this with all brands is on the welcome email sequence, giving them a survey talking about why they purchased the product. But ideally at that scale, you want to get on the phone with customers or a Zoom and just ask them as many questions as they'll allow you and give them free stuff in return. That's what you want to do initially. And just to wrap that up, if it was a consumer packaged goods product, that would be testing Facebook ads most likely, ideally with an influencer that makes sense for that audience, and then trying to reach out to as many of those people as possible, responding to any comments on the ads, anything you can do to pick up low-hanging fruit in terms of customer intelligence.
Got it. So especially in the early days, don't focus on scale, focus on just getting in front of as many consumers as possible, getting their feedback. Yep. I really resonate with what you said there as well with the prospecting. One of my things that I nerd out on is just really closely looking at the technology products that I really like and why I think they stand out amongst the ones that all suck, which is most of them. Yeah. And I find that a trend that I think is so valuable is this like really in-depth, sometimes seemingly annoying onboarding like quiz or set of questions you're asked before you actually get access to a product. But if you think about it, like I think especially when you're trying to like leverage someone's dopamine system to get that feedback, they're ready to cross that first gate of getting a test or getting a sample or checking out. So it's like you have their attention in that moment. And I've seen so much awareness, even like HubSpot. I signed up for an account the other day and it asked me like 7 questions before it let me even create an account. And I'm like, that's what they're doing. They're literally understanding why I'm here, how I got to this page, and what I care about before they give me my experience. So I get it.
There's a huge debate on this, and people have different models. I'm sure companies have internal proprietary models for friction versus investment, right? Where you're like, oh, I'm so close, like finally getting through this quiz, and then it being enough friction where you're like, you know what, I give up. Yeah. And this is through each phase of it. There's different ways to stack those little hill climbs of investment and then the result and the friction. So yeah, there's a whole like just body of literature on doing that internal to a lot of these companies, especially in tech, where there's so many different internal to the app features that are doing things like quizzing people and getting feedback from the customer. So yeah, that could be like a year in like school or something. There's so much there.
Literally. Love that. I know we've had several conversations about this next topic offline, so I'd love to pick your brain on it here. What are you seeing about the implications of all this new AI tech coming out, and how is it affecting the marketing landscape?
Yeah. So I think what'll inevitably happen is it'll just automate a lot of what people are doing manually for testing. So in terms of the reflexivity of testing with things like creatives, where feeding creative into a big machine learning backed optimization system like Meta, I always like, it's my pet peeve when people are like the algorithm, because I'm like, man, the amount of algorithms that system entails is so far beyond one. But I suppose the whole thing's an algorithm. So feeding it into that and getting feedback on what's working in terms of like creative. And then now we're taking that and putting it into a lot of creative tools, which have their own machine learning systems to go and optimize creative. Those are getting better and better every year, because with video and images, we're just gaining the ability to add tags to all these, like informational tags to all these images and videos that are telling these systems, giving them more points to optimize on and getting closer and closer to accurate in terms of what is causing an effect on a platform like Meta where we're advertising. So a lot of those take data directly from Meta. So you can plug like an ad optimization system into Meta. It can get the feedback and give recommendations on what it's thinks going to work based on the data points it's getting from Meta, and then the data points it has internal in terms of the tagging system on those videos or images. We're really just one step away. If those systems could already connect and the optimization systems could get all the data that Meta has on the back end to make its optimizations, we'd probably already be there in terms of like not needing people to go and create new creative to keep testing. Just the whole process would be automated, right? In some sense, that might already be possible if it was like all the data on customers on Meta was open source or had an API where it could just, without showing us the sensitive data, feed it over to a creative optimization system. So that's an example. I think that's going to happen with page testing. It's already happening with email marketing because ChatGPT is a human language interface, whatever, it's native to human language, the interface it currently uses, which lends itself well to written content like emails. So that's already happening with that. We have buddies running email marketing agencies, and we're just really jealous because they can immediately apply this to their work, spin up work that's at the 80 or 90% level and just go through and make edits. So I foresee that happening with all different parts of growth. And so just the layers of abstraction between someone managing growth and directing these systems the bar will keep going higher and higher to where you'll need fewer and fewer people, but you'll need someone to still most likely in the foreseeable future provide a lot of this directional sort of support for these systems. So you'll be more like a sort of tending machines rather than making specific commands about what we're going to do in terms of tests, I would think, as these systems progress.
So interesting. Do you think those people who are in those roles you're talking about, is it going to be really specialized knowledge, do you think? If I think about that in the future, okay, maybe, and here's even an example of like robotics. Right now, across the street, there's this massive dog park and dudes don't mow that lawn. Now robots mow that lawn. It's crazy. But the dudes have to program this robot to mow the lawn. So it's in a way almost he has
and they're out there like when it tips over, they're out there to like just flip it back over.
Exactly.
Like,
make sure it doesn't run over a dog. And we don't want that. But it's really interesting because while it's, you're losing that job, he almost has job security in a sense because it's a specialized skill set to understand how to manage this complex thing now. Do you foresee that being the case with marketing, or do you feel like these tools are so intuitive that it is quite easy for someone to say, even me, let's say 3 months from now, I'm like, okay, time to start like really throttling no talks. I don't even need to go hire an agency because these tools are really empowering for the average person.
We'll have to get back to the context on no talks because I was like so interested in what you said about the robots mowing the lawn because it's so directly applicable to this. I'm going to touch on that first and then we can go to that. It's directly applicable to man. So my business partner Austin always jokes about when they start doing page testing, how these systems are just going to go off the rails and create page tests that are ridiculous. But we already see that in like Meta when it's optimizing for ads. For instance, if you expand an audience and go really broad with an audience, a common thing that'll happen if you have a very specific messaging is you'll start to get a lot more negative comments from people because inevitably the audience you're now targeting, because you've allowed the system to broaden its scope, it's now targeting people who aren't genuinely interested in your product or service and may disagree with your messaging, may have negative feedback for you via negative comments on your ads. So this is negative feedback that's unintended, and it's an unintended consequence of the human inputs to this system that were just an unintended consequence of broadening, in this case, broadening the scope of the audience. But that's going to happen in a lot of instances where, because of the speed of optimizations, there are some unintended consequences that have to be where you have to go back and make a revision on things like targeting or intent or the inputs you're giving to these systems. And so I think for quite a while that will require someone who has some expertise, particularly in knowing as these systems are communicating, what those different communications may result in and the boundaries, and knowing what edge cases, if you will, those things could result in a crazy page test or some copy that's super not applicable, just because the human inputs we're working with, oftentimes we don't like immediately know what the edge cases could be when we input them in these systems. So I think that'll provide job security for people that are highly skilled at this. But I think with all this AI, I would assume that it'll allow people who are highly skilled at these things to leverage their ability to produce value, while the majority of people or less people will be needed for those more marginally valuable positions. So I would assume like the top 1% of people in growth will become like the top 0.1%. And for a lot of us, we'll do something else. But I think there'll always be a lot more like potential for creation that comes out of these systems than just lack of need for humans, because there'll be all these new capabilities that people can become expert in.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's just so interesting to think about the implications of all these things. It's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's hard to predict. It's super hard to predict. Yeah.
Very wild. So I have a question for you. You've worked with so many brands, so many companies. I'd be curious, this is more from like a business management or just like that sort of lens. What separates the businesses that end up doing really well versus those who don't over time that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think there's so many things out of people's control, or that at least would seem to be out of direct control. So that's my caveat. And leaving those things out and giving people what I have seen in the brands I work in that's applicable to everyone and like equal opportunity points of leverage for growing a business. For me, it's really just the people who are just consistent for whatever reason about doing things as good as they can in all areas, and not overlooking any area of their business. I know it sounds so boring, but the best businesses I've worked for, they're people who they're inevitably just super dedicated to their business, and they're looking in every single part of the business for optimizations. And it's such a boring cliche answer, but I actually have worked with very few business owners who are like this, where they're just hardcore operators. They love figuring out every problem in the business, and like they have figured out their own fully optimized system for getting their finances done. Their fully optimized system to get creative made, right? If they're working on supply chain, they're making sure they understand all the pieces of it so that when they're talking to anyone who's managing it for them, they can get into the nitty gritty with that person, right? Like they might not be able to manage it day to day, because as a business owner, you might not have the experience or just bandwidth to be able to scale and work on every part of your business as it scales. You definitely won't, but they do take the trouble to learn every part of the business in depth, or have someone, on the team, whether it's a founder, hopefully like they have a co-founder or a couple co-founders, where each of them bring some overlapping skill sets so that they can dig into different parts of the business. And there's no part of the business where both of them are just like handing it off to someone and not checking their work. Like they're able to, I would say that's the easiest, simplest way to put it. They're able to check the work of every department in their company. Yep. Obviously not every person, but every department. They can go drill down to the details. Someone on the founding team can check the work for all the major departments as the company scales.
Love that. That's like the Elon Musk example of him just going into a room and grabbing the marker and the whiteboard and solving engineering problems with everyone else.
Yeah, that's a great example. Whether or not he still does that at SpaceX or Tesla, like I have heard that as well. That's a great way to put it, is like the best companies I work for, they have founders who can go like check, like work with the accountants and try to understand all their work. They can go to the warehouse, understand everything that's going on supply chain. They have another founder that can talk to like the whole creative team and make like decisions. Like they're in the weeds for everything. Like they can be.
I love that. I think that's a great transition to looking at your own business as it's grown. Clearly you shared it started with you and Austin, just trying to get anyone to work with you. You've scaled, you've got team, you've got all these systems. What does that look like for you as a business owner? How have you had to grow and shift as the company has grown, and what personal shifts have allowed for the most growth for you and the business?
Yeah, I would say, man, for me, so I've had a good background working on teams from my time in the Army. So I was on active duty for 6 years and worked with all different sizes of teams, from like squad level, which can be like as small as 8 people, to battalion to be like 600 people. And yeah, it's man, I'd say the biggest shift for me was probably just having to focus on learning more for coaching other people. So I also like to learn. I love to learn things on my own, but there's been a lot of things in the business that I haven't necessarily been the most attractive thing for me, like setting up systems and like learning how to build systems for this business, things really to set other people up for success, that I had to take away from my own like learning time. So being a little less selfish with what I wanted to work on in the business. When we started, there were just so many skills to learn, and that was really fun because you're just learning skills and working with clients. But inevitably, to scale, you really have to set other people up to do that. And like I mentioned, luckily I'd had some experience with this from my time in the Army, but I really had to put that aside because a lot of the skills and growth are super fun to learn. Like I've talked to you about some of the stuff I've learned on my own, and having to focus a lot more of that time on building things to facilitate other people's performance with clients has been the biggest shift, I would say. Probably the other one, like to give people a really specific one, is the learning finance piece. That's like a big one I've been tearing into recently. And as you scale a business and have expenses and overhead, it's just so critical. You can't get around it.
Yep. Not just getting excited about a creative solution to a problem, making sure it's financially sound as well, obviously.
Yeah. Yep. And not just trying to throw growth at everything, not just trying to be like, let's just get more sales. Like at some point you have to look at what you're spending. So
I love that. I know I fully acknowledge all your caveats of not being able to get too in the weeds on a generalized question, some of these growth questions. I feel like when I think about what intrigues me the most about you is I feel like you're such a nerd about systems and efficiency in general. I would love for you to talk, whether it's in marketing, some of your favorite tools, or even just like personal productivity. What are some of the systems that allow you to be really efficient in your life, or that you just are nerding out about these days?
Yeah, this is such a funny one because like I am a huge nerd about systems for a couple of reasons. So one, kind of the part that's really natural about me, like how I'm a huge natural like nerd, is I just love mathematics, and the systems always involve a little bit of math. So that's fun to me. The idea of arranging things for whatever reason. The less nerdy part though is like I wasn't good when I was a younger kid at focusing, right? I was just all over the place, and I really had to learn systems to just keep track of things, right? And so as someone who wasn't naturally good at keeping track of a lot of things, I think I've had to go farther than a lot of people in developing systems just to manage all my own projects. And so it's been helpful for something like a company where you're trying to manage a lot of people, because there's like a lot of systems that I've already built for myself that we can more or less copy paste for a lot of the team. To get specific, a lot of the systems I really enjoy now are ones that are super simple to use and they're underbuilt so that there's not a lot of features people can get confused by. So one of the ones we use internally that I love, I've always loved, is Asana, just because it's so simple. It's like the McDonald's of like task management for internet businesses. I love it. You can't mess it up.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like a lot of our team really loves Notion, and I love some of these really complicated task management systems too. Like I love ones that are linking, like Roam or Obsidian, for anyone that's like super nerding out on these, but they're a lot more complicated and they take the higher level user to use. So I like things that anyone can jump into and understand, even if they've never been in it. So I love Asana. For my personal task management, it's really simple. I just use Asana. I use a calendar. I use Kanban flow. You can replace that with any Kanban board you have, like a Trello, anything like that. And normally what I'll do is just have my different lists of like big projects. And every few days or every week, I'll just pull some tasks from those projects and put them on like an organized sort of list. And then I'll just throw those on my Kanban board for however many days out I'm planning, so that during the week, and the big work blocks that I want to get done. And then I can flex those as needed if like meetings get rescheduled or whatever else. And I can also throw in anything that's like a fixed date that's already on my calendar. So that's kind of what I use. That's been helpful. Other than that, I've messed with a lot of other stuff, but just keeping it super basic has helped me a lot.
I like that. That's a really good insight. I've for sure, especially with all it's almost like FOMO these days. Every time I open Twitter, it's like the 6,032 AI tools just released to maximize your productivity. Look, I got to use all of them right now. But I think that's a really good point of just what are you trying to achieve and what is the path of least resistance to doing that. And there's so many I've been trying lately, and inevitably I get confused or frustrated or there's friction and I just stop and I go back to what works. So I think that's really valid.
I think the biggest hack actually is just using, for me, maybe this will change, is like just using a project management tool to manage my personal life as well. Like the same boards that we have for like ATTNlabs, I have my own projects board, which I pull everything that I need to do or tag it so it's in there if it's from there, as well as like everything else. Buy mom a birthday gift, like everything is in there, so that I can just manage it the same way I do like professional projects. It's running your personal finances through QuickBooks. It's like the same idea, like just might as well.
Yeah, I really do agree. I had a buddy call me the other day. We had lived together a while back and he's got some big projects coming up and wanted to pick my brain on just organizing his life. And it literally is just like a work project where you have your overarching like big goal, but then you just break it down into little things and do it. It's
pretty funny because like with work, we're so often we have way more external pressure to get things done. If you have a boss you're trying to please, or like clients. For me, the biggest one was like, I just want to do better. This is not good enough. And so it forced me to get better. And it was funny because as I learned this stuff in business, Delaney, I was like, why am I not applying this level of attention to detail to my personal life?
It's a great realization. And it's and it's great to realize that like so many people think they don't have that discipline, but it's just a reframe, honestly. And it's just like and once you decide you're going to implement it and get some reps in, yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're my idol in that space, man. You with your 8 o'clock bedtime.
I'm a nerd, bro.
I aspire to be there, man.
I know. I'm a nerd. Somehow I still have a girlfriend.
You got me on the decaf coffee though, so that was good. Huge upgrade.
Are you actually fully on decaf?
Right. Yeah.
Let's
for a little bit.
That's impressive, bro. Wow. Okay. We're going to sidebar on that later for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's pivot to technology, even though we'll acknowledge that you do a little bit of work in that space. It's not your bread and butter. If you were just launching a technology product, what would be your high level plan of action to really bring it to market? What channels would you leverage first and foremost? And again, speak it to whatever degree, or just make any assumptions that feel work for this question. But anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to tease out and make tactical for people who are really trying to up their game of either user or customer acquisition in general.
Yeah, definitely. I think partnerships for sure, both even more so in B2B now, but especially in business and consumer products, but in both of them, partnerships with anyone that has an audience or anyone that has a distribution channel, because those personal relationships, everyone knows how to build them. And obviously getting in touch with certain people is harder than certain other people just because of the nature of like their work and how much demand they're in for the type of relationship you're looking for. But partnerships, because of people's ability to wield these like massive distribution networks, whether that's an audience or like a physical vendor where you're going to put product on shelves, the partnerships always is like the first thing for me. If I was starting a product company from scratch, it would be all partnerships first for distribution channels and audiences to launch. And then ideally using those to facilitate better performance on paid traffic as like the second avenue of growth. And of course, all the stuff on the back end for retention. There's a million different channels being used for retention now. But if you're talking about initial growth, that basically like a basic sales campaign or partnerships campaign.
Yeah, that makes sense. That feels the most risk averse in my mind. If you were to just throw a ton of money at traditional ad spend, that feels more risky to me than especially if it's just your time and energy. Like you can truly put in a couple hours a day to work on nurturing those relationships. And it really might only take one or two legit partnerships to land to really validate and get those first 100,000 customers on a product.
Yeah, especially if you have a product people haven't used and you need to do some explaining for the use case. It's different if you're going to launch like the best toothbrush ever, because people are going to be like, okay, well, this is a toothbrush. So if you can show me something that actually makes it like 10x my toothbrush, maybe I'll buy it. But if you're trying to explain a brand new product, that's going to be even harder. So it's even bigger risk, right? If the best toothbrush company comes out and we have the toothbrush that whatever does this amazing thing, like you might be able to blast that on ad channels and do great from the start. But if you have a brand new product, like it's going to be even more important to be risk averse with your marketing spend for sure.
Love that. Cool. Makes me feel way more confident in my own approach. Super cool. We're at about 45 minutes here. For anyone listening who's interested in everything you've talked about today, where can they connect with you? If they're a CPG company or they have a bigger brand that's really making waves in the space, how can those people contact you as well to understand what your offering is?
Yeah, absolutely. ATTNlabs.com. You can check that out. You can check out my LinkedIn too. It's just Ian Lenny on LinkedIn. I do put out some content that's all related to Attention Labs on there. Basically, that's all I use it for. But we follow our same advice. We have mostly grown through partnerships and referrals. So we are now just dipping our toes in the water of broadening our marketing message. So the first little bit of that is via content on LinkedIn. So I do post there. So check that out. And then, just the site, attentionlabs.com.
Cool. I will drop that.
That's ATTNlabs.com.
I was going to say, it's not the full word, but I'll drop it down below as well. Perfect. Ian, thank you so much for being here. I always love talking to you. You're a wealth of knowledge. So really appreciate you sharing for the audience as well.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Delaney. Appreciate it, man.